Good morning and welcome to the very first Travel Forward Virtual. My name is Richard Gale and I'm the event manager for Travel Forward. It's a sign of the times that this year's event is an entirely digital affair. And whilst the continuing global health crisis prevents us from meeting in person, I'd like to assure you that we have applied the same effort and energy into delivering a digital event for you this year. The knockback to the travel industry has been severe. But in putting this event together, we were encouraged by the enthusiasm and resilience from just about everyone we spoke to. The event will be virtual and will sit alongside WTM just as we do in the physical world. There will be a virtual exhibition with booths to facilitate exhibitor and visitor video meetings, a brand new VIP buyer program where over 70 top-level hand-picked purchases of travel technology from around the world are matched with our exhibitors, and a free-to-attend virtual conference with the theme Resilience, Innovation and Response. The three conference tracks are Tech Talks, Travel Experience and Digitization, and Innovation and Disruptive Tech, with more than 40 speakers featuring in keynotes, moderated panels and case study presentations. The programme will address and tackle the challenges being faced today. It will feature startups with new, innovative and disruptive technologies, and we'll take a look into the future technological landscape for travel and tourism. That's all from me. I hope you have a great time in the next 3 days and you find it useful and enjoyable.
Good morning and welcome to the WTM Travel Forward session, a glimmer of hope, recovery in global travel. I'm Paul Charles, the CEO of the PC Agency, and I've got a fantastic panel to share some insights with this morning. Now, on the face of it, there doesn't seem to be much to be hopeful about at the moment. Just this morning, Norwegian Airlines was refused any further funding by the Norwegian government, leaving it facing huge uncertainty. Norwegian is a high-profile symbol of the downturn in aviation, and that downturn affects the whole of the travel and tourism value chain. If airlines don't fly, then it's harder to reach a destination, especially long haul, and that will impact hotels, villas, car hire firms, and of course the local economy of tour guides, restaurants, taxi drivers, etc. Now 2020 has been pretty much a write-off, a washout for much of the sector. So will 2021 be more positive? And if so, how? Well, joining me on the seminar are our experts this morning, James Clark, the UK General Manager of Travelzoo, Stephanie Boyle, Head of Industry and Partner Communications at Skyscanner, and Rachel Reed, Head of Communications at ITOA, the European Tourism Association. Good morning to all of you, and thank you for joining us. Hoping for some fascinating insights from you and some truth around what's going on in the sector at the moment. James, can I start with you from Travelzoo? Is 2021 looking more positive compared to 2020? And if so, how?
Morning, Paul, and morning, Stephanie and Rachel. So there are some positives, and I don't think anyone wants to relive 2020. From our perspective at Travelzoo, and our recent European survey has brought lots of interesting data to the forefront that underpins the statement that 2021 will certainly be better than 2020. For us, in a nutshell, we know that there is pent-up travel demand there. We know that in this market, price is not going to be a driver. In fact, it's going to be around refundability, flexibility when making that new booking. We're looking at a new booking area that will be highly customer-centric. So customer service is going to be key, and business loyalty is going to be there, especially because customers will be remembering who they booked with, how they were treated, what their experience was like. That's going to be key in this new world. Where people travel to is also going to be key. We know that the UK will remain very popular, but Europe is also looking like our home for our members, with 63% of our members looking to take at least 3 UK breaks, but also over 1 in 2 saying they would only travel to Europe for their next holiday. So lots of interesting data, but lots of data that supports that 2021 travel will return.
Okay, lots to unpick there. We'll come back to quite a lot of that. Let me ask Stephanie, first of all, on one particular point there that James made around price not necessarily being a driver. Do you agree with that?
I think price will still be important. I don't think price ever goes away. I think especially given that there is a lot of uncertainty. It seems to be the word of the second half of the year. If unprecedented was the year of the first half of the word of the first half of 2020, uncertainty is definitely the word of the second half. I think price still factors in because there is uncertainty around your job, around the economy as well. But I think to James's point, absolutely, it's going to be around value. It's going to be around flexibility. It's going to be around other factors that we really haven't seen before. A lot of what Skyscanner has been doing has been putting in place measures and launching new services to help restore confidence amongst travelers to make that booking when they are looking about travel and thinking about it and actually converting it into a booking. So I think there is a lot of demand out there at the moment. It's very pent up and we're going to see it convert directly into bookings. I think price will still factor in, but I think the overall value and the security around being able to make that booking with confidence is going to be the biggest factor.
If you look back at Skyscanner guests or customers who've booked pre-COVID, would price have been really one of the top two things that would have driven their clicking through to book an airline ticket?
Definitely. I mean, one of the main reasons that people come to Skyscanner, it is around comparing. It's around being able to find the flight that makes sense for you. And a large part of that for some people is going to be around price. But it's being able to have that choice, that convenience to build travel that makes sense. And that's still going to be a huge part of it. Right from the start of Skyscanner's journey on Earth, it's been around demystifying the complexities of travel, bringing it all into one place so you can pick the flight that makes sense for you. Price is obviously a big piece of that. When you're comparing things, you want to make sure that you've seen everything and that you know you're getting the best price. But you also want to make sure that you're getting the right times, that you're getting the right flexibility, that you're getting the right cancellation policy if that's something that's important for you. And I'd say if travel was complex 15 years ago, it's more complex today. So our mission remains the same. It's to demystify those complexities. It's just that we've got to layer in all these additional factors and criteria that we hadn't done before. So while price will still definitely be a key component, I think flexibility is going to be the new big word.
Yes, if we think complexity exists now, let's come back to that shortly, because it's going to be a key motivator, I think, over the next few months. Rachel, for ATOA and the European Tourism Association, your members have been through a horrendous time, like most companies in the travel sector. Where do you see hope at the moment? What are they telling you?
Well, you know, Paul, a couple of points that really play into what Stephanie and James have said with regards to the demand. And we always think of it at ATOA in terms of describing it along the 3 M's model, which is money, means, and motivation. So they need to be able to afford to go, which is the price discussion. They need to have the motivation to go, as in want to actually travel, and they need to have the means. So they have to actually be able to get there. And what we see in all aspects of the industry at any time, not just in COVID, is those 3 factors play off against each other. So sometimes it's money that is the key driver, sometimes it's means, and sometimes it's motivation. And I think something that's a really positive thing that we hear from our members and just from other surveys that we collate together when we're thinking about insight and research is that the travel industry is always incredibly resilient on motivation. And people still want to come. I mean, we had an interesting piece from our colleagues at the European Travel Commission around actually alongside actually catching COVID, people's biggest fear was more having to quarantine. So they really want to go. They're just concerned about the means, in fact. So whether they can actually get there and what the infrastructure would be like in terms of what happens when I come back. And as you say, that the money factor is it's different for different people at the moment. Some people obviously have lost their jobs, but people are prioritizing travel. They really want a break because, you know, that is part of, you know, why people go on holiday is to have a change of scenery, and that demand still very much exists. And I think just one thing to mention is we have looked at a survey done by our colleagues at the American Tourism Association, USTOA, and they are saying they're seeing bounce back for long haul from the States in Q3 of 2021. So that is one piece of encouraging news.
Q3, so September pretty well 2021 onwards, which perhaps is a bit further out than some are hoping for. James, you were nodding there, but what about the first 7 months of 2021? Are they a washout as well?
It's a similar story, and I completely agree with Rachel. Actually, my 3Ms are slightly different. Mine's mindset means a market, and so we're very, very similar there. And a mindset is a big one linked to when people are going to book to travel and actually B, when they want to travel. And for us, what we're seeing is early Q1, the return of booking, in particularly January, when we've surveyed our members. The key month there will be Q1 for booking, and January still is scored the highest month for making that booking, which is great, and it's a positive to return to a little bit of normality in the travel industry. But for the key booking, for the key travel dates, we are looking at September being one of the highest, followed by June as the second highest. So 2 key dates there for us to focus on, linked to what Rachel has said in September. Maybe that's more of a mental block for a lot of people to think, I will give it X amount of months before I feel happy to travel again. There are always going to be the optimists who wish to book maybe sooner. But I think if we are to see any return to earlier departures in 2021, I imagine they will be domestic rather than international.
Stephanie, I'm going to come to you in a moment just on that timing, but just for anyone watching, there are other letters in the alphabet available, not just M's, if you're looking for ways to describe the turmoil that's going on at the moment. Just before I get to Stephanie on that point, James, so what you're saying is that your research among your own consumers is telling you that they are nervous still, maybe in Q1 2021. They are waiting in Q2 2021 really to see if a potential vaccine starts coming through and maybe testing. We'll come back to testing shortly. And then they actually travel or they book from Q3 2021. Which one is it?
So the biggest months on our survey are January and March for making the booking. So that's when we've asked our members, when do you foresee yourself making your booking for your next holiday? The biggest months are January and March 2021, with the travel dates. Number 1 is September, followed closely behind by June and May. So they're actually there as well for travel dates. So September for travel is the number 1 month for 2021, followed by May and June. But for booking, we are looking at January and March, which, as we said, for Q1, that's a positive sign for the market.
Well, at least there's cash coming through potentially, which is obviously what a lot of operators want to see. Stephanie, your research too. I mean, there's lots of research flying around, but I'm trying to get the themes here across all of them. Your research, I think, is showing clearly that people are prepared to book just before travel. Is that right? That the booking period itself is coming down quite substantially from what used to be, a 3-month to 6-month time frame to something much shorter?
I mean, that's one of 3 big shifts we've seen.
One of 3 big M's.
Behavior. They're not M's this time. Sorry, I've let the side down. But we did a report. Obviously, one of the big pieces around Skyscanner is our data, because we are looking at what people have done and also what they're predicting to do in terms of the travel searches that they're making, but also the bookings that they're making. And we have seen a really big shift towards a much shorter booking window. I don't think anyone on this call will be surprised, but it's not just happening at certain times. That's really big in terms of the share of searches that we're seeing that are a much shorter booking frame. And that's anything from 7 to 30 days, which is significantly up on 2019 levels, but also in the last 7 days before flying, they're making those decisions. And I know that we've all seen this. I mean, half term was a great example this year. We start seeing certain destinations get put back onto that travel corridor list, which, Paul, I know you talk about frequently. It really does convert into immediate interest and immediate booking. And to be able to see that level of intent convert that quickly is actually really reassuring for us. And just to pick up on something James said, it's actually close to 2020 levels when it does. So in October, we saw right after
2019 levels or 2020 levels?
2019 levels.
Yep.
Thank you. Close to 2019 levels. In October, when we saw the announcement of Tenerife being put back onto the corridor, we saw an increase in 508% to searches to the Canaries, and that is at 80% of. It was bringing the volume of searches up to 80% of 2019 levels. We've seen that elsewhere as well. We've seen those travel bubbles that are being announced or talked about in Asia doing the same thing to lifts and searches. We had over 2,000% increase in searches between Singapore and Hong Kong when they talked about introducing that travel bubble. And similarly, when Canada talked about easing the restrictions around their borders, the immediacy of what we've seen in terms of travel search and converting into actual bookings. So I think that pent-up demand is definitely there. There are going to be travelers who are less risk averse, and they're going to convert very quickly. So they'll look at the announcement and they'll make their decision very fast because the uncertainty of how long it's going to remain open to them to be able to make that decision. But the other big shifts that we've seen, which we've already talked about, is a move towards domestic. And that's even in those markets that are highly domestic already. So bigger markets like the US and India, we're still seeing a big shift towards domestic in those markets. And also a shift towards one way. Talking about, again, whether price is going to be the key thing that people look for, flexibility, making a one-way travel decision because you don't know when you'll need to book that return. Will I need to book it really quickly, or will I actually just go ahead and stay for 4 weeks and hope that the lockdown ends? So I think
that could be the reason they don't want to return from where they came from.
No comment, but we have seen that increase in one-way searches. And obviously it spiked in March, but it has continued to be significantly higher than it was in 2019.
And James, presumably travels, you saw a bump when the Maldives travel corridor was announced, and the Canary Islands as well, I'm sure. So presumably it's the same finding there.
Very much so, yeah. Maldives and some destinations where the prices have been able to come down and become a bit more attractive than maybe in previous time. That's definitely seen a resurgence for somewhere like the Maldives, the Indian Ocean, the Caribbean. So when these corridors have opened up, you've actually got a bit of a match there because you've got a corridor to a destination where there's deals and they remain deal-led. What I would say to that is one of the pieces of data that's coming out of our survey is still out of the European markets that we surveyed between the UK, Germany, France and Spain. Germany and the UK are very similar, where still when asked where they feel most comfortable travelling to, Europe is the strongest. So UK, that's 55%, and in Germany, 60% feel they only feel comfortable booking and travelling within the EU for their next holiday, which could be linked to this reaction we've had by governments of changing the corridors, which means people have had to needed to get home. Maybe there's that mindset there that if you're further afield, it's more difficult to get back. Where if you compare that to the likes of France and Spain, they actually feel a lot more comfortable about booking longer haul destinations.
Yes, definitely uncertainty is an issue, and we'll come back to the confidence factor in a minute. Rachel, I suppose if there's any music to anyone's ears, surely it's going to be music to some of your members that there is this desire to travel perhaps more domestically and short haul in the medium term over the next year or so, because consumers can be more certain about perhaps the level of healthcare or getting home more easily than if they were flying long haul. So are you seeing that your members are actually saying, yes, it looks good in the future, we've just got to get through the next few weeks?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, of course, it depends what your normal business is. If you're normally bringing Australians, it's quite difficult to shift that to Spanish people, for example. But yes, absolutely. And I think one thing we've discussed at ITOA is there was quite an interesting piece of research that Skift produced a few months ago about the pivot to domestic. And if one were to take all the spend that your citizens normally spend overseas and bring that in domestically, which countries would be winners and which countries would be losers. And it was very interesting. I think the UK did very well in that because they have a high proportion of outbound travellers. And if you're able to switch that to domestic, that's very good for UK PLC, as it were. Compared with, say, a country like Spain, who generally overall has more people coming in internationally than it has leaving. So they would do less well in a pivot to domestic. But if you're thinking about not just domestic, but near neighbours, for example, Belgians going to France, then that is also an encouraging story, certainly for service providers, because it doesn't really matter if someone sleeping in a hotel has come from America or Belgium. They're still sleeping in the hotel, aren't they? So, that's very encouraging for service providers on the ground, certainly. I think probably less so, though, for the airlines that are bringing in the long haul visitors. I don't think the shift to domestic is super news for them, unless they've got domestic routes, obviously.
Yes, no, I think from an airline perspective, obviously, it's pretty clear it will take 3-4 years, maybe slightly longer to recover to where it was in 2019. But as we've seen this morning with Norwegian Airlines facing a grimmer outlook, clearly there are going to be casualties over the winter period. And I guess, James, if I come to you first, and Stephanie, it doesn't look good at all, obviously, when an airline is a casualty, because that then affects certain destinations and removes some of the places that your consumers can choose to go to. James, do you see a shift if an airline does sadly go under? Do you see a shift to other destinations as a result?
It's a good question, and the simple answer is that we've been in a very fortuitous position where over the last few years in particular, because of the amount of flight capacity in the market and airlines flying certain routes. And if we look at New York as a good example, the New York-London route is operated by scheduled airlines as well as low-cost airlines, which ultimately the only winner from this is the consumer, because prices then get brought down and we're able to travel long haul for a lot less. Now, if that capacity is removed from the market, and you've mentioned someone like Norwegian who operates that route, if that capacity is removed, then ultimately prices are going to edge up northwards. We also know that one of the other playing factors there is business travel on those aircraft. And if business travel isn't there again, price edges up northwards. So what will happen is there's two swings that can happen. One is that the hoteliers will have to be even more aggressive with their rates, and these resorts will have to reduce rates to try to entice customers to their locations. And unfortunately, that lays upon a lot of tour operators to do that negotiation and work those rates out. Or ultimately, other routes will become more popular because there is the capacity there. And that probably lines up nicely for Stephanie to say, if a new emerging route appears, Skyscanner will be able to identify that and highlight that to its members.
Go on, Stephanie. Is that right?
That's great, James. No, I was just
doing your job for you.
It's great. But I was going to echo a lot of what you said. I think the key for us is there's just going to be such a need for innovation and innovation at speed, because travel is changing. We've already talked about that a lot over the last year, but if business as usual, we've agreed, is not coming back, then it's up to us to start to define what business as unusual looks like, and what kind of unusual are we comfortable with, what kind of unusual do we want to build. Because I think that if you look at business travel, there's just no question. We've managed an entire year without it, to some extent. And while all of us are waiting to get back to the real WTM, like we talked about, to get back to having a pint with someone that you haven't seen in a year, to signing that contract in person, it isn't going to be the same. And so what are airlines going to do? Are they going to be reconfiguring their cabins? Are they going to be doing a lot of incentivizing for business travel? And some of those big routes that are just known to be incredibly profitable for a large amount of carriers, they're going to need to rethink their strategies. And that may be a partnership between New York and London, and understanding what kind of additional tourism products they can develop. But there's going to need to be a lot of innovation. And I think it's going to take an extraordinary amount of collaboration. We've already seen a lot of that collaboration happen during the last 8 months. Skyscanner, I'm sure, like many others, has been working to support our partners to make sure that we're giving them insights and data in real time so that they could get a better sense of what's coming or what intent we're seeing. So sharing a lot of that to help people in their recovery strategies. But it's going to need to continue. And I think it's going to need to continue for many reasons, for innovation, for distribution, but it's also going to need to continue in terms of what do we want to rebuild? How are we going to make sure that we rebuild sustainably? And I know this brings us onto a whole other topic, but these are all things that have been bubbling. They've been buzzwords. We've been talking about them, but they're going to need to happen at scale and at an incredible rate in order to ensure that we save this industry and that we can come back stronger.
Now, we have well over 300 viewers watching this. If you've got a question for any of the panel, for Rachel, for James, for Stephanie, that I can put to them, then please do use the Q&A box, fire in those questions as soon as you can, and we'll get to some of them in a minute, hopefully. Let me just pick up a couple of key issues. One we've already talked about, which is testing and quarantine. The other one is Joe Biden and the US in particular, which I think would be worth reflecting on. First of all, just on quarantine and testing, obviously a lot of surveys have been done by all of you among customers and members. It's widely known that the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, who reiterated again this morning, is chairing the task force, which is due to report any day to the Prime Minister with recommendations. And hopefully there will be some sort of testing regime in place from the 2nd or 3rd of December. How much would that regime provide a boost to confidence? James, if I asked you first, perhaps, is that going to be a bit of a silver bullet, to use another well-worked phrase of COVID? Is it going to be the answer if quarantine is reduced from 14 days to, say, 7 days, maybe 5 days, plus a test? Is that going to be enough to pump prime demand among consumers who might only want to take a one-week holiday?
I think the honest answer is no. I think it's going to be a number of contributing factors that will help the market recover and grow. In this market, I don't believe there is necessarily going to be a silver bullet, because even if a vaccine is announced tomorrow, there's going to be a rollout time and a time to immunize everybody around the world and in all these countries. So I think what we need to look at is the facts, and surveying our members. What we know is with the refundability, and we've talked about this area of booking, changing a booking sits as their prime kind of, should we say, factor that's important to them when booking. The second point is actually about the COVID numbers in that country. So again, we're not talking about an immunization, or we're not talking about vaccines or testing. Those matters come slightly further down, where government support is there around a testing scheme and then a vaccine. So I think at the moment, people are willing to travel without this testing process in place, because they're more worried about potentially what's that country they're traveling to and the situation in that country. So that's the factual part, which I can comment on. Personally speaking, would it entice myself to travel knowing this was in place? It would. I think that gives me confidence personally. So I think if we were to phrase that question to our members without necessarily giving them the other options, I think the answer of yes or no, the answer would generically be yes.
Rachel, would you feel the same way? What are your members saying in terms of 14 days coming down to maybe 5 days plus test, and would that make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, as James says, it's not the silver bullet answer, but it is a starting point, and it's going in the right direction. So we deal a lot with government policy and infrastructures, and this is an intention that says we think we want to reduce the quarantine levels by trying to put other measures in place. So that in itself is an encouraging piece around the infrastructure. Absolutely, because it then paves the way for that to be reduced if the testing time were to be quicker, for example. And I think one thing you can also think about is the VFR, traffic visiting friends and relatives. And that does make that trip suddenly more doable if I'm only quarantining 5 days instead of 14. And again, they can be the trailblazers. And as Stephanie mentioned earlier on, you need innovation and trailblazers through this. So anything that encourages movements is good. So absolutely, yes.
Lots of questions coming in. We'll get to those in a second. Stephanie, let me ask you first about the Biden question. I think I detect a bit of a transatlantic accent there.
You do.
Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whatever anyone feels about the apparent result, and we'll see where that goes in the next few days. Is it good or bad that Joe Biden is in office from January and is president?
I think we can all agree that it's good.
Just in terms of COVID, because it's pretty clear from talking to a lot of operators and airlines in the US that what they fear is Joe Biden creating some form of national lockdown in the US. Now, again, whether you agree with the science or not of doing that, if that happens from January at some point, wouldn't that delay a giant part of travel's recovery because of the US continuing to be shut?
I think it depends on whether we're talking about international travel or domestic travel, because obviously there's a lot of restrictions in place for international travel already, regardless of it being Trump or Biden. But I think that Biden being in office, personally, obviously, I'm extremely pleased. I think it's going to improve the reputation of America across the world. So from a interest on inbound travel to the US, it's nothing but good in the long term. I think also in terms of being able to be a lot more strategic with how we're going to support and harmonize an approach across the globe, which I think is going to be central to restoring confidence. I think Biden's probably far more likely to be doing that. Those are a lot of things that he's talked about in his policy. He's also going to be reintroducing the United States to the Paris Agreement. So from a climate perspective and from a lot of the bigger topics and themes that the industry is going to have to tackle over the next few years, it's nothing but good. However, yes, in the short term, it may mean that there are some changes to the way that the US has been traveling. But if that does stamp out the virus or dampen the virus a little bit, that can be nothing but a good thing in the long term as well. Just to touch briefly on the statistics that people were sending out about measures. We've also done some surveying, of course, and we have seen that it's 3/4 of UK travelers said that having that quarantine time from 14 to 7 days would make them more likely to travel abroad. So while I agree it's probably not going to be the one thing, and in a separate poll to industry, 68% said it's not going to be till there's a vaccine in place that we're really going to see this pick back up again. But I do think it's going to be something that will start to turn the tides.
Okay, now lots of questions. We've got 10 minutes, so let's please have short answers if you don't mind to these, and we'll rattle through as many as we can. One slightly from left field. Do you think that rail travel will play a role in the recovery, especially in Europe? Rachel?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. We've already seen a lot of people, instead of taking a flight, say, for example, from the UK into mainland Europe, take the Eurostar and their car, because then even if flights are cancelled, there's much more chance that they can still get home again. So yes, so absolutely rail. And Europe has one of the best rail infrastructures in the world. And certainly people, say, for example, through Switzerland, Germany, Belgium, it's already very well organised. I think the only thing that would stop it being more significant is, of course, passenger limits in the carriages because of social distancing. But yes, absolutely true. I think it is a key part in getting people moving, especially in these near neighbour travel that we were talking about. So the shift to domestic and near neighbour, rail plays a huge part in that. Yes.
Good, thank you. James, is there any evidence of consumers making destination choices based on variable COVID numbers within a country, e.g. in England and Scotland or in Wales? Do you have any evidence to suggest that?
So really only the data that I just shared, which we know that the COVID reduction at the destination is a factor that is important when planning the trip. So we know that's their second highest tick box from when making that planning. So the answer to that would be yes. But from a UK domestic point, we survey our members across the UK. So we don't pinpoint just when we do this survey, we don't just pinpoint certain markets. So we do get the blended response across all UK nations.
Okay, very helpful. Stephanie, do you believe the airline industry will reduce the numbers of passengers on flights to help customers feel more comfortable when flying? And let's get back to the confidence point that we've been talking about. And even if there is testing on departure, which the Transport Secretary again was talking about this morning, possibly removing the need for mask wearing on board. Well, the question is, do you think that we need to see fewer people on board?
I think it's a delicate balance. I think that all of those measures that you just mentioned are really important. They're going to play a big role in that, because I think that there are people who have done flights recently where there was airport testing in place on departure. They then were on a flight where everybody was wearing masks, major changes in the service, which, by the way, is something that you can find on Skyscanner. We've introduced that, but also ensuring that you then are coming from a country that has low levels, going into a plane that has extremely good air filtration systems. I mean, this is the one thing that air travel has over rail travel. The air filtration is extraordinary. It's second to hospitals. So I think that having that, ensuring that everybody's wearing a mask, and the very big welcome change to deboarding, which means that everybody has to stay seated rather than everybody standing up. If anybody has taken a flight during COVID, it's beautiful. So extraordinary experience. I recommend it. But I think that that's actually going to lead to a lot more people feeling confident. So whether or not they're going to have to then balance that with fewer people on the plane is going to be up in the air. I would say load factor is obviously still a really important part of an airline's network planning. So.
Good. James, do you think the lack of travel insurance options at the moment, and this is obviously partly due to FCDO, Foreign Office changing advice, do you think the lack of options at the moment is contributing to people's nervousness to book?
I think it will, especially with the, should we say, the probably more older demographic, the demographic they may have underlying health problems. For those individuals who generally pay maybe a slight premium for insurance anyway, and now being told that certain covers aren't in place, then yeah, it will ultimately affect this motivation to book travel. But it's one of the contributing factors, as we've talked about already, that kind of makes up that whole theme.
Good. Rachel, do you share that in terms of travel insurance and obviously government advice? Because without government advice, the confidence surely isn't going to lift.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's two strands to that question. One is on the commercial side in terms of insurance products that are available. If they're simply not there in the market because insurance providers think it's too risky, then that's one side of it. You can't necessarily purchase full refund COVID insurance. Everybody can't necessarily get that. But yes, absolutely on the government guidance infrastructure question, it really makes an enormous difference. What is actually set up in place, because people, luckily, I suppose, do follow it. And I think we have spent quite a lot of time lobbying for this and, making sure that governments don't just go, oh, well, let's just say none of it, without necessarily thinking that through and the consequences that has on lots of economies. I'm not just talking about the travel industry as such, but lots of countries, particularly in Southern Europe, rely on tourism as a key part of the economy and all the associated jobs. So, governments do need to think very carefully about what advice they put out and make sure it is properly scientifically based.
Okay, we have 3 minutes left, still lots of questions coming in. Let's go to a Brexit one. Yes, we're only going to mention it once on this session, but Brexit, do you think that it's going to stall further recovery, even after COVID recovery? And, how can it improve confidence when things such as the European Health Insurance Certificate, for example, is removed? Stephanie, do you want to go for that one? Brexit?
I honestly, give me a crystal ball. I cannot answer that question. I thought
you were going to say, give me a gun, because when Brexit's mentioned...
No. But I think this is something that, it's obviously going to be important for us to all factor in. But after COVID, I think that Brexit is not necessarily going to be the hugest thing that happens to our industry this year anymore. So that's one way of looking at it. And I think that it's just going to be around ensuring harmonization, across the board and working together. I'm sure that's a big part of what Rachel's going to be doing in her work, but we're going to be doing it on the private sector as well, making sure that we're looking to find accords across the board and making sure that everything is as harmonized and as easy to understand as possible.
James, do you think that because of Brexit, and again, you may need your crystal ball, but because of Brexit, certain countries which have been popular in the past on Travelzoo may fall down that league table?
I think two things. First off, I'm an optimist. I believe they're having a meeting this week and a deal's going to be struck that protects this kind of collaboration we have with the EU. So I'm being an optimist and being hopeful, because I don't think we need any more bad news in this world right now. But if that was to happen and we were to have a tough and maybe a hard exit from Europe, then ultimately destinations will change, and the destinations the government does deals with, where there's like almost better travel corridors or different duties applicable. Of course, it's going to change, but I think go back to what Stephanie said so well at the beginning, which is this is all going to be around collaboration now, and which governments work well together and which ones can form strong relationships.
Okay, final 30 seconds we've got. So I'm going to ask each of you for your one glimmer of hope for 2021 and what it is. Can you pick one out? Rachel, you first.
Demand. Demand is always there in travel. It's incredibly resilient. People are waiting to travel. As soon as they possibly have the means, they will go. And I think that's really important for us.
Stephanie?
The love of travel, the absolute love of travel. I'm sorry to say the same thing as Rachel, but it's true. I have felt sad all year and not being able to travel, not just because I work in the industry, but genuinely love it. And I think that that is shared across the entire world.
Here. James?
Resilience. This market, I've worked in this industry for a long time now. September 11th, no one else knew what to say. We thought the industry was over. Then we saw things like ash cloud. Again, we thought the industry was over. We keep coming back. We keep dealing with these, regardless of failures or economic crashes or global terrorism. We keep fighting back. Let's keep doing it this time. We will get back.
Fantastic. What a great positive way to end. Well, thank you very much to my panel, to Rachel Reed from Atoa, James Clark at Travel Zoo, and Stephanie Boyle at Skyscanner. And thank you to all of you for watching.